I watched my sister in her custom ivory gown raise her hand and strike my daughter across the face. The glass slipped from my child's trembling fingers, staining the marble in red. My daughter, only 10, froze in fear. Her little body shook as the entire engagement party fell into stunned silence. And still no one moved. No apology, no shame, just icy rage in my sister's eyes as if my child had ruined her life. I, Miranda Connors of Charleston, South Carolina, had bent over backwards for my sister's happiness. I paid for half this damn party. But in that moment I saw everything clearly, the hierarchy, the entitlement, the truth. And I made a silent vow. That slap would cost her everything. They say family is where you're safest, where you're known, loved, and sheltered without condition. But standing in the grand hall of the Belmore Hotel, with chandeliers sparkling above and a live quartet playing Bach as background noise to the elite murmurs around me, I realized that wasn't true for me. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. Because in the middle of my sister's engagement celebration, her second might, I add, I watched her raise her manicured hand and strike my 10-year-old daughter across the face. It wasn't a playful tap. It wasn't a flustered mistake. It was a sharp, humiliating slap fueled by rage entitlement and the ugly kind of vanity that only grows when no one dares to challenge it. All because of a red fruit punch stain on her overpriced white dress. A child made a mistake. A child spilled a drink. But my sister Vanessa reacted like my little girl had ruined the whole affair. I stood frozen for a breathless second. Time slowed just long enough for me to register the sting blooming across my daughter's cheek, her lip-trembling eyes wide with confusion and shame. The glass had already shattered on the marble floor, the red liquid seeping outward like blood. But no one, not my mother, not Vanessa's fiancé, not the guests sipping champagne around the fountain, stepped forward. No one defended her. No one said a word. My daughter whimpered, "Mommy," and something inside me cracked. You see, I wasn't always the quiet one. I wasn't always the sister in the background, the one cleaning up after parties, making the calls, picking up the slack, while Vanessa chased new careers, new husbands, new wardrobes. But over time, I learned to keep the peace. I swallowed pride. I made excuses. I told myself it was just how things were in our family. Vanessa sparkled. I stabilized. That's how we survived. But watching my child flinch in front of a crowd that turned their backs and clinked glasses as if nothing had happened, I felt my spine straighten. I felt something ancient and powerful rise in my chest. It wasn't just rage. It was recognition. Recognition that my silence had raised a monster. My sacrifices had fed her self-importance. My loyalty had cost my daughter her dignity. I pulled my daughter into my arms and looked at Vanessa not with hurt, not even with fury, but with clarity. "You shouldn't have done that," I said quietly. Vanessa scoffed, waving a server over to dab at her dress, already calculating who was watching and how to spin the narrative. Maybe if your daughter were raised with some manners. I didn't let her finish. Not because I couldn't bear to hear it, but because I already knew how the script went. She would twist it, turn herself into the victim, and I would be labeled overly sensitive, overly dramatic as always. But not this time. Not today. I kissed my daughter's forehead, smoothed her curls, and said only this: "It's time we stop showing up for people who slap us back." I walked out of that ballroom with my daughter's hand in mine and my head held high, but deep inside something was already unraveling, something decades overdue. Because what Vanessa didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had just found something. Days earlier, buried in a dusty filing cabinet in my late father's study, I discovered legal documents, deeds, and a power of attorney Vanessa never expected I had access to. I hadn't planned to use them, Not until now. But after that slap, after that silence, after the smug curl of her lips, I knew what had to be done. The days of being the quiet sister, the overlooked one, the loyal doormat, they were over. And Vanessa. She was about to learn what happens when the woman she dismissed becomes the storm she never saw coming. Growing up, I used to believe that love meant sacrifice, that if you gave enough of yourself, people would see your worth. That if you kept showing up being kind, being useful, they would one day turn around and say, "Thank you. I see you." But with Vanessa, all I ever got was silence. Or worse, applause that skipped past me and landed squarely on her perfect little shoulders. Vanessa was the golden child. From the time we were kids in Columbia, South Carolina, she had this glow about her. People noticed her. Teachers praised her even when I was the one doing her homework. She got the front seat on road trips, the last cookie in the jar, the louder birthday parties, the newer clothes, the undivided attention. I used to sit in the corner watching her twirl in new dresses, clapping like a fool. I called it love. Now I know better. It was conditioning. Our mother reinforced it. "Miranda, let your sister go first. Miranda, your sister's tired. Miranda, don't make a fuss, it's Vanessa's day." Funny how every day somehow became Vanessa's day. Even when our father got sick and I dropped out of college to take care of him, Vanessa swooped in during holidays, smiled for the camera, then vanished again, and still she got the praise. She came all the way back from New York to see her daddy. Meanwhile, I was scrubbing the floors and cooking soup for a man who barely remembered my name by the end. I remember missing my own daughter's kindergarten recital because Vanessa called sobbing about another failed relationship. I left work, picked her up, and sat with her through wine and mascara and another monologue about how men never understand her ambition. When she needed money for her first startup, I pulled from my retirement fund. When she couldn't pay rent, I added her name to my lease. I told myself it was what family did. I told myself she'd do the same for me if roles were reversed. But that slap, that moment, it made everything I'd ignored come rushing back like a flood I'd held behind a dam of denial. She hadn't just slapped my child. She slapped the child of the woman who gave her everything. When I left the engagement party, my mind spiraled through every closed door I'd ever accepted, every thankless favor, every time I swallowed my voice to keep the family peace. The loans never paid back. The holidays spent in her shadow. The way even my daughter knew to shrink beside her aunt because she'd watched me do it her whole life. And then, guilt. Guilt because I realized I had taught my daughter to believe that being quiet was being kind, that enduring was loving, that dimming your light for someone else's comfort was somehow noble. I saw myself in her frightened eyes and hated that it had taken a slap to wake me up. I sat at my kitchen table that night long after my daughter fell asleep, the house quiet except for the hum of the fridge. I opened the manila folder I'd taken from Dad's study last week, the one with the heavy legal language I hadn't yet dared to read fully. Inside were property deeds, trust documents, and one quietly devastating surprise, a controlling interest in the family's real estate company left to me. Not Vanessa. Me. At first I thought it had to be a mistake. Dad hadn't spoken much in his final year, but his handwriting was unmistakable on the back page. "Miranda, this is for you. Because I know you won't steal it, but you will protect it." Tears welled in my eyes. All those years I thought he hadn't seen me, but he had. He saw every sacrifice, every silence, every load I carried without complaint. And so I made a decision that night. No more quiet. No more being the one who bends. No more being second to a woman who wouldn't flinch at hurting a child to protect her own ego. Vanessa had built her world on the assumption that I would never stand tall enough to shake it. But now I had the power, and I was done hiding it. I waited 3 days. 3 days for a call, a text, a whisper of remorse. Anything that might suggest Vanessa had replayed what she'd done and felt the sting of shame. But nothing came. Not a peep. And on the fourth day, I realized I hadn't just been disrespected. I'd been discarded. My sister didn't regret slapping my child. She regretted being seen doing it. It started with the silence, then came the deflection. My mother called that afternoon voice light and airy, like she didn't have a clue. "Vanessa's a little embarrassed, honey," she began. "You know how stressful these events are." The dress was custom, and the stain, well, it set her off. She didn't mean to really hit Maddie. Let's not blow this out of proportion. Blow this out of proportion. I stared at the phone in disbelief. My daughter still had a faint outline on her cheek. She'd asked me twice if she'd done something bad. She'd started sleeping with the light on again, and they wanted to pretend it was a fabric emergency. When I didn't respond, my mother took a sharper tone. "Honestly, Miranda, you've always had a way of turning the smallest thing into some moral crusade. Your sister is the one getting married. Why would you try to ruin that for her?" There it was. The pattern. The script I'd lived under for 43 years. Vanessa was always the main character. I was the plot device that supported her story. I didn't argue, not yet. I simply said, "I hope you never speak to Maddie like that." And I hung up, but it didn't stop there. That night I received a flurry of group texts from cousins, aunts, and even Vanessa's fiancé's sister, most of them implying the same thing: "You're making a scene. You're being dramatic. It wasn't that bad. You're always so sensitive." The gaslighting came fast and polished like it had been rehearsed. And that's when I knew this wasn't just about the slap. This was about years of them seeing me as disposable. My daughter, a 10-year-old child who had never harmed anyone, was being treated like she'd committed a crime because I had dared to walk out, because I had broken character. The next morning I found a card in my mailbox. No stamp, no envelope. Just a folded note in Vanessa's handwriting. "I hope you're done with the dramatics. You embarrassed yourself and Maddie embarrassed me. Let's try to move on before you humiliate the entire family any further. V." That was it. Not a single word of apology. Not even a mention of Maddie's name with affection. Just a command to move on like my child was a spilled drink she wanted wiped away. I held the card in my hand, staring out the window at the swing set in our backyard, where Maddie used to play every day after school. But now she sat on the porch quiet, distracted, withdrawn. That was the moment I snapped. Not with rage, not with screaming, but with decision. If they refused to apologize, if they refused to even see the harm they had caused, then I would stop seeking justice from people incapable of delivering it. I would make my own justice. And I wouldn't do it with fists or threats. I'd do it with contracts, with shares with leverage, with the very power my father had left me in silence. It was time I started playing the game my sister played so well. But unlike her, I wouldn't need to lie or slap anyone. I would just need to show up with the truth. And when I did, their whole house of cards would crumble piece by pampered piece. The next morning, I cleared the dining table and spread out every document from that dusty manila folder, like I was mapping out a war plan, because in many ways I was. I hadn't looked at it all in detail before. At the time, I was too consumed by grief over Dad's passing to make sense of what I was holding. But now, with my hands trembling and rage barely tempered beneath my skin, I read every line. I traced every name, every signature, every line of ownership. And what I discovered stopped me cold. The family company Connors Property Holdings, the legacy our grandfather started with a few duplexes and a stretch of farmland, wasn't being run by my uncle as I had been led to believe. In fact, he had stepped down the year before due to illness, quietly selling his remaining stake. To Dad. And then there it was, a notarized document dated 6 weeks before my father passed. Transfer of controlling interest to Miranda Connors. 71%. My name, not Vanessa's, mine. I sat there stunned, rereading it over and over again. Dad had left me the majority stake in a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio, not in a trust, not with stipulations. Directly, silently. He hadn't even told Mom. Maybe he knew she'd run straight to Vanessa. Maybe he knew that of his 2 daughters, only one would guard the family name without greed. I thought back to the weeks before he passed. The way he grabbed my hand at the hospice center when his voice was barely above a whisper. He'd said, "You always did the hard things, the right things." I just wish I'd said that more. He had, just not in words. He had put it in ink. I pulled out the corporate directory. Every one of our family's rental properties, commercial buildings, and parcels of land mapped, managed, but barely monitored. My uncle had apparently allowed my father to absorb the business quietly after he stepped away. And now, it was all mine. Vanessa didn't know. No one did. Which meant they were still living in delusion. Still treating me like the supporting act in her stage play. Still talking behind my back, sipping mimosas in their Sunday brunch circles, calling me Fragile Miranda or the single mom with the boring job. But the woman they dismissed? She owned their bank. And here's where fate twisted the knife a little deeper. 3 of the venues Vanessa had booked for her wedding, including the hotel ballroom she had just humiliated my daughter in, were under long-term lease from a management group owned by us, me, and the family's summer cottage in Hilton Head, where she planned her bachelorette week. It was under Connor's property holdings. Technically, under me. I almost laughed. How poetic was that? How deliciously ironic. I didn't know yet how I would move. I wasn't impulsive like Vanessa, and I didn't want to let vengeance poison me. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I wouldn't stay silent this time. I wouldn't walk away and let her bury this with another designer dress and a pity story. No, she needed to see what it feels like to be on the outside of a circle you thought you owned. She needed to learn humility not by my words, but by the quiet shift of power slipping from beneath her feet, while she danced in heels she didn't earn. I looked at my daughter playing with her dolls in the living room, still quiet, still healing, and I made her a silent promise. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about restoring her sense of safety, about showing her what strength looks like, not by shouting, not by slapping back, but by rising so high that the people who hurt you have to crane their necks to even see you again. And with that, I picked up my phone and dialed the estate attorney, because Vanessa had planned a wedding. But what she didn't know was that I was planning a takeover. I didn't slam doors. I didn't scream. I simply got organized. The Monday after I contacted the estate attorney, I began assembling the board documents required to activate my full ownership rights over Connor's property holdings. No press, no announcement, just silent paperwork, notarized signatures, and subtle shifts of control. Property managers were notified of a new primary signatory, me. Lease renewals and vendor contracts now required my approval. My name slid onto documents where Vanessa's never appeared, and still she had no idea. She continued planning her wedding, posting daily updates with hashtags like Vanessa and Victor 2025 and Chas, Queen of the Isle. She flaunted her custom dress fittings and her second bridal shower, yes, second, on Instagram like nothing had ever happened, like she hadn't slapped a child. Like she hadn't iced out her own sister with a cruel note and a complete lack of remorse. But while she posed for selfies, I pulled financial records. The more I dug, the more disturbing it became. My father hadn't just left me majority ownership, he had done so because he knew Vanessa had been siphoning. Quietly, subtly, for years, invoices for consulting fees that led nowhere. Branding expenses billed to our rental properties, personal luxury goods written off through shell companies our family accountant never dared to question. Vanessa had been using Connor's property holdings as her piggy bank, and no one ever stopped her because no one thought I'd care enough to look. But now I was looking, and I documented everything. I printed records. I copied hard drives. I hired a forensic auditor under a confidentiality agreement. Every shady transaction she had made in the past 6 years was now lined up like dominoes waiting for a single push, and yet I still hadn't told her. I didn't need to. My silence was power. Instead, I quietly contacted Belmore Hotel, the venue hosting her wedding, and arranged a meeting with their property liaison. I explained I was the majority stakeholder behind their leaseholder group, and that I had reason to believe that upcoming events might compromise the company's values. I asked for all contracts related to Vanessa's wedding. The manager blinked when I handed her my credentials. Then she smiled. "Of course, Miss Connors. We'll provide everything. You see, I wasn't going to cancel her wedding, not yet. That would be too easy, too obvious." Instead, I began to rearrange the stage beneath her thread by thread. I began speaking directly with the hotel's billing office, adjusting payment schedules, and slowly exposing the truth to the people around her, just not directly. It started with the florist. Vanessa called me 3 days later, voice sharp, annoyed. Why did the florist say our contract might be in review? I played dumb. "I'm not sure, Vanessa." "Are you having financial issues?" she growled. "Don't be petty." I smiled through the phone. "Oh, I'm not. I'm just finally paying attention." Click. She hung up. The calls kept coming. The photographer, the venue coordinator. Even Victor's sister texted me asking if I knew why Vanessa seemed so scattered. Because the lies were unraveling. Because power she never earned was slipping from her fingers. And then came the moment I had been waiting for. The day the Hilton Head Cottage's new access codes kicked in, the very day Vanessa planned to arrive with her bridesmaids. She called me frantic. "The code doesn't work. Did you change it?" I leaned back in my chair, calm as ever. "Yes. The property was never yours to use without permission. And after you assaulted my daughter and humiliated me in front of 100 people, I decided to exercise my legal rights." "You're being ridiculous." "No, Vanessa, for once I'm being fair." She screamed, called me bitter, called me small. And I let her, because that tantrum was the last gasp of a woman who had built her world on a foundation she thought no one would ever shake. But I had the documents. I had the power. And soon I'd have the truth on my side in front of every person who once believed her version of me. Vanessa had always believed I would never stand up for myself. But the difference between a pawn and a queen is who knows how to wait in silence. And now, checkmate was coming. The sun rose over Charleston like it always did, warm, golden, and full of lies waiting to burn. It was Vanessa's wedding day. The Belmore Hotel glistened with imported roses, white silk runners, and champagne fountains funded by a woman who thought herself untouchable. Guests filled the lobby, staff bustled through the halls, and somewhere on the 5th floor, Vanessa was sipping mimosas in a silk robe, completely unaware that the empire she leaned on financially, socially, emotionally, was about to collapse. I arrived at 10:32 a.m. sharp, not as a guest, but as the woman who owned the walls around her. I wore black, not because I was mourning, because I was done pretending. My daughter walked beside me dressed simply, quietly radiant. I wasn't there to create a scene. I was there to end a chapter. Once and for all. The hotel coordinator met me at the ballroom entrance. "Everything's in place, Miss Connors." I nodded. "Thank you." By 11:15, the guests were seated. The string quartet began their piece. The hush of anticipation fell. And then Vanessa appeared on the grand staircase in a custom Vera Wang gown, beaming, preening, waving. A queen in her moment. I let her bask in it for exactly 40 seconds. Then I walked forward. My heels clicked against marble. My daughter stayed behind, safe with the coordinator. I stopped halfway down the aisle and turned toward the crowd. "I apologize for the interruption," I said, my voice steady. "But there's something important you all deserve to know before you bless this union." Vanessa's smile faltered. Over the past 5 years, Vanessa Connors has stolen over $380,000 from the family company funds meant to support housing developments, rental programs, and community restoration projects. She falsified invoices, rerouted vendor payments, and created shell accounts. All of it, hidden beneath a polished smile and designer heels. Gasps rippled through the ballroom. Whispers, hands to mouths. Chairs creaked under shifting weight. Vanessa stormed toward me. "You're insane! You're ruining everything!" I held up a folder. "These are notarized financial audits, property records, and bank statements. I own 71% of Connor's property holdings. You used company funds to pay for this wedding, this hotel, that dress, all of it." Her fiancé Victor stood frozen on the altar. And then he stepped down. "Is that true, Vanessa?" he asked. She blinked. "She's lying. She's jealous. She's always been jealous." "Is it true?" She looked around and saw no allies. Just judgment. Suspicion. Faces that once admired her now stared with narrowed eyes and silent condemnation. I had to borrow from the company," she stammered. "I was going to pay it back." Victor shook his head. "No," he said softly. "You weren't." He removed his boutonniere, dropped it on the floor, and walked out. She turned to me with rage and horror mascara streaking down her cheeks. "You planned this." "Yes," I replied, "and you earned every second of it." I didn't scream. I didn't gloat. I just handed the folder to the hotel coordinator and walked out with my daughter. As we stepped into the sunlight, the doors behind us closed on the sound of Vanessa's world unraveling, just like she had once tried to unravel mine. Later that evening, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Vanessa. "Please, just tell Maddie I'm sorry." It wasn't enough, but it was something. Still, I said nothing in return, because while the apology had finally come, the choice was now mine, and I had one chapter left to write. It was quiet in the house that evening, the kind of quiet that comes not from absence, but from peace. My daughter was asleep on the couch, curled under a blanket, one arm around the old teddy bear she'd clung to since that day at the engagement party. The bruise was gone, but the memory lived in both of us, and so did the change. 2 days had passed since the wedding that wasn't. Vanessa's fall from grace was swift and merciless. Vendors withdrew. The hotel canceled all remaining events pending payment. Victor's family severed ties, and the online narrative began to shift once invisible whispers, now public and piercing. But I didn't gloat. I didn't bask. I rested. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea staring out into the dusk-colored sky when my phone rang. "Vanessa." I almost didn't answer, but something in me, curiosity, maybe closure, let the call connect. Her voice was nothing like before. It wasn't polished or sharp. It wasn't performative. It cracked like old porcelain. "I messed everything up," she whispered. Silence stretched between us like a chasm neither of us had dared to cross in decades. "I didn't think you'd ever fight back," she continued. "I thought you'd just forgive me like always." I said nothing. I was awful. To you? To Maddie? I don't even know why. I was always jealous of how solid you are, of how people trust you. And when you walked out that day with your daughter in your arms, like you didn't need anyone's approval, I realized I don't even like the person I've become," she cried. Real tears this time. And I believed her, because even villains have breaking points. "I'm sorry," she said again. "For all of it. For Mom. For Dad. For taking everything and giving nothing back." I closed my eyes, let the weight of decades settle inside me. "I forgive you," I said. And I meant it. But that didn't mean I was going back. Forgiveness wasn't a door opening, it was a chain falling off. And I wasn't going to chain myself back to a family that only remembered my name when they needed something. I was done being the helper, the peacemaker, the one who'll understand. I was Miranda Connors, the legal owner of Connors Property Holdings, the mother of a daughter who now saw what dignity looked like in action. The woman who stood up quietly, calmly, and reclaimed every inch of the respect she was denied. The next morning, I booked 2 one-way tickets. We left Charleston with nothing but our bags and each other. No family dinners, no awkward apologies over wine, just a fresh start. A quiet coastal town where no one knew Vanessa or the slap or the scandal. Where I could build something new, something mine, something ours. Sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it doesn't come with applause. Sometimes justice is simply walking away and never looking back.